Going? Good? Yes. All right. Yes. Check, check, check. 3, 2, 1. Here we go. All right. It's 40 on Sunblock podcast, and we're back. I guess let's just get right to it. China, 3.93%. Italy, a whopping 6.7%. Iran, 4.26%. South Korea, 0.89%, less than 1 in 100. Spain, 2.3%. Can't read my own writing here. France, their neighbor, 2.12%. And the good old US of A, 2.32%. Those are the mortality rates as of today, Friday the 13th, 2020, for the infamous coronavirus. Well, here's what I want to talk about right now. Gentlemen, notice I didn't say ladies and gentlemen. I'm done talking to the ladies in myriad ways. That's a discussion for another show or maybe another venue. Okay, listen. Well, no, I'm not. I'm done talking to all the ladies except my daughters. How about that? My eldest daughter. I got several kids. I got 4 kids. My eldest daughter is she's my eldest. She's been with me the longest. She's the oldest. She's the most mentally mature. Sometimes. She ever hears this, Dad. I try to bring my daughter into my realm a little bit. I have kind of since day one. Spent a lot of time with her when she was very, very young. I was teaching at night, and her mom was working the corporate job, and her and I were just inseparable, for like the first 2.5, 3 years. And I've just always treated her like an adult, spoken to her like an adult, and tried to just train her mind to be analytical, and not. I got to be careful. I got to be careful here how I say this, and I also have to be careful in practice as a parent, because I'm someone who's not like trying to, herd my daughters into all the sports I wish I had excelled at and things like that. And it's nothing like that. I don't think a woman's first and foremost nature is to be analytical. But to the extent that capacity and that inclination is there, I do try to. Well, I try to husband it in my daughter. She's sharp as a tack. All my kids are sharp. She's super smart. And one of the things that we've gotten into doing lately, I'm so giddy about this. It's just so much fun. You go through these little phases with your kids of just like different kinds of things that you do together. And the trying to sort of like cultivate the analyticity in her has taken different forms over the years, even when she was very, very young, spoke to her just like she was another adult in the room, never got into like the baby talk thing or anything like that. But then more recently, as we've gotten into, she's growing 6, 7, 8 years old, reading like more complicated books, just having extended discussions about the character motivations and things like that. And really just kind of breeding in her that probing nature, right? One of the things we've gotten into lately that just makes me so happy is she watches, like political commentary with me. She watches these shows, on TV. And I don't really watch TV per se, but we catch like on YouTube or Hulu or whatever. We'll catch like Tucker Carlson or The Five, or stuff like that. And she loves it. She loves it. And I love it that she loves it. And she gets it. Like I don't really want her like immersed and embedded in that world, but she could easily become like a commentator. She's so sharp. Anyway, we've been watching a lot of Tucker lately, and Tucker Carlson, that is, on Fox News. And we really enjoy him. I really enjoy him, he's sharp. He's funny. His topics are relevant and pertinent and timely. He's just got a lot, as opposed to like someone like, sorry, I know some of you out there are going to be like offended that me as a conservative are taking this shot, but the end of that Tucker Carlson show, you got to have your finger on the button of that remote. Because if you don't, Sean Hannity is going to be right up in your face with his 1 hour run-on sentence. You just got to turn it off before he starts. Because once he starts, you're going to kind of be like, oh, I'll just wait till he finishes this sentence. Then I'll turn it off. And he never, ever, ever finishes a sentence. Period. It is, I'm so enervated and annoyed by that man. I'm with him. You know, we're of an ilk philosophically, I guess. You know, we're conservatives. And I'm sorry that I'm taking a shot here at someone on the team, so to speak, but I just cannot bear with him. I cannot stand his presentation style. I cannot stand, what am I doing here? This is not the point of the show. Anyway, my daughter and I watch Tucker a lot. And this past couple weeks, we've been watching Tucker, you know, as we're able. And obviously the show has been dominated by the coronavirus stuff. And as we've been watching these episodes, there's been like this tendency that seems to be coming out in Tucker's presentation that I'm just kind of registering it here and there, and a little worried about it, you know. Not only that, but also sort of like a sort of argumentative move or inferential move that Tucker makes that I actually got right to just asking my family about at the dinner table the other night as a sort of like testing ground for this episode. And I just want to talk about him here because I think it's important. So the first thing is, look, I've called this episode posturing or positioning and posturing pundits, or posturing pundits in pandemics, or something along those lines. Obviously, I'm really hung up on alliteration. I guess I'm not very creative with my titling, and that's like my sort of go-to mechanism, whatever. But I want to sort of try to capture for you what I mean by posturing or positioning, because it's important here. And I don't want to dwell on it too much because I'm really hesitant to lay this charge at Tucker's feet, because I got a lot of respect for the guy, and I think that he does really important work, and I don't count myself really as his peer, you know, or like I should. I mean, he's the guy's a professional, but it just is a little bit questionable to me. So I want to run it by you and see what you think. And then in the course of doing so, I also want to run by you what I think is this sort of mistaken thing that he's doing with his logic that is just, especially in terms of the current chaos, the present pandemic. See, I'm hung up in the alliteration thing again. The present predicament is, I think, pretty, well, it's dangerous. All right. So, and that's sort of why I began with the mortality rates. I'm in Wisconsin at the moment, and we have, man, it's so funny. We've got 8, yesterday was 6, today it's 8 confirmed cases of coronavirus. Man, I went to Woodman's yesterday for some beer because I thought I was going to record this show yesterday. And it was like, Woodman's, how can I capture this for you? It was like Jesus was coming, which, I mean, if you're in Madison, Wisconsin, the prospect of Jesus coming is not a good thing. It's a bad thing. So it's like people are running for the, stockpiling. It's like the only time you'll ever see progressives prepping. They were prepping. All right. Man, you could just barely move. Woodman's is a big place that you could barely move through there. So here's what I mean by positioning and posturing. And I just want to sort of present a little bit what Tucker's been doing lately and just register a worry about it and kind of maybe draw some larger lessons from it. And then we'll get out of here and we'll get out of the, next subject matter tomorrow or whatever. You remember back, I'm trying to think of an example of this. Do you remember back during the Ron Paul era? You remember all the Ron Paul supporters? What was their big shtick? What was their big thing that they did? It was like this, oh yeah, the left is awful, but the right is awful too, right? Like this moral equivalency thing where you like, they're as libertarians, they very clearly, let's be real. They very clearly sided with the right more than they did the left. But in presenting their position, they would do this sort of split the middle, find the middle ground thing to sort of like separate themselves from both, right? And I think when you're separating yourselves from two things, you're positioning yourself between them, right? Now, you might think, well, that's just What if you don't agree with either position and you're just taking a third position? What the hell could be wrong with that? You're right. But in positioning as I'm thinking of it, the motivation becomes more about just taking a different position than it does in sort of like satisfying any, commonly held intellectual virtues, like reasonableness or rationality or truth, right? Anything like that. Okay. So positioning is like, it's like for the sake of the novelty of the position or setting yourself apart. There's a little bit of vanity in it. Okay. That's what I mean by positioning or posturing. Now, again, this is a heavy charge, and I really like Tucker. So I really got to pull back a little bit, be careful, because it just, something he's been doing lately just kind of has the ring of that to me. I don't want to dwell on it too long. It's not the main point of this show, but I don't know. Let me know what you think. So Tucker's been commentating on the coronavirus, multiple shows, multiple weeks, right? And what I think he gets right, okay, is that it's pretty clear. It's not pretty clear. It's ridiculously obvious that for the left, for the political left, for the liberals, for the Democrats, for the crazed Marxists pretending to be Democrats, right? What this represents for them is a last-ditch effort. The effort that was, embodied by the Russia thing, and the effort that was embodied by the Ukraine thing. Both, dramatic failures, as everyone knew at the out, and impeachment, right? Everyone knew these were going to be failures, right? Because there was nothing to them. There was no substance, right? But then this really represents like their last attempt to dislodge the strength of the Trump presidency before November 2020, when Trump's going to be reelected, right? And so their criticisms of his handling of this pandemic, epidemic, whatever you call it, at whatever given point along the timeline, the development of this thing, their criticisms all really just boil down to that, because the criticisms have no substance outside of that. I mean, if you go back to, remember the swine flu with Obama? What did he finally get around to addressing that? 10,000 people had died. You guys got no room, right? And what were the Democrats doing for the first month and a half that the coronavirus was an issue? And Trump was actually talking about it. They were trying to impeach Trump. They didn't get around to addressing coronavirus until it was dead clear that impeachment was a flop, right? So they have no ground on which to stand, and everybody knows what they're up to. And Tucker's really good about pointing that out, okay? And that's usually how positioning and posturing works. Your criticism against the one side is pretty apt. It's pretty right. It's pretty spot on. But then instead of just siding with truth and right reason, you try to position yourself in this middle territory to set yourself apart from both sides. And again, it sometimes, often, in its more pernicious forms, has the sort of flavor of self-aggrandizement. Because it's like, okay, are you about truth here? Are you about really what's right and accurate and good, or are you just trying to make a name for yourself, take a position, to mark out some territory for yourself? You know what I mean? So his criticism of the left and what they're doing with this and just trying to use it politically when they just have no ground on which to stand in that regard. And Trump actually, let's be real, has been stellar. I mean, it's not his fault that the CDC didn't have tests ready. He's been stellar, right? That, as far as I can tell, the actions of the administration have been stellar. I mean, 40 days before 30 or 40 days before the World Health Organization could even get up the gumption to call this thing a pandemic, right? What was Trump doing? Trump was already shutting down flights to and from China. He's on it, right? But they have no hope of dislodging him, so they're just making all these irrational accusations, outlandish claims about how he's handling it, and hoping in sort of one last effort to rattle him, or to rattle the foundation of his base. I don't think it's going to work, but that's neither here nor there at the moment. So Tucker's criticism of the left is apt, but then he goes, but the other side's not handling it well either. Rightly criticizing the way the left is proceeding, and then instead of just actually giving Trump some credit for the prudence and the decisiveness with which he's taken certain steps and sought to quell and calm public fears in other circumstances, you nonetheless criticize that side but you do it in a way that is broad and ambiguous enough that it really can't be proved or disproved. Okay? So the criticism of one side is real substantial. It's really clear that's what the left is doing, right? I mean, look at the facts. Look at how Obama treated swine flu, right? Look at what the Democrats were doing for the first month and a half of the coronavirus when they could have been addressing it, right? These are substantive, substantial things. But then when it comes to criticizing the right, the accusations get real vague. Then you're like, well, why are you criticizing both the right and the left? Well, it just seems with Tucker, it just seems like he's trying to stake out some middle territory. And I just worry that sort of has the tinge of positioning, like just trying to set yourself apart rather than just making the effort to side with where the truth and reasonability lies. Is that clear? Probably said it better the first time. Like I said, it's my second time recording the episode. I'm going to play you some clips from Tucker. All right. And I want you to just sort of notice, we'll draw attention to what I just tried to describe. I don't want to hang my hat on it. It's not hugely important. And like I said, I like Tucker, and I'm even hesitant to bring such a sort of indemnifying charge against him, right? I mean, I think he's trying, and I think he's often great. And his presentation and his topics and his arguments are great. I think he's great. So I want to be too heavy-handed here. But I definitely do want to draw attention to this question that I asked my family at the table the other night, because it seems to form a significant piece of his argument, and I just don't get it. Okay? And it's numerical, and it's quantitative, and it's database. So it's database, and it's data-based. All right? So when we come to it, I'll mention it. All right? But I'm going to play a little bit of Tucker here, and we'll hear what he has to say, and kind of, I hope to illustrate for you what I've been talking about here. We'll look at it, we'll analyze it like we do, and then we'll get out of here. All right? So here's Tucker. And I should say, I'm not positive about the chronological order of these clips. I think I have them chronologically correct. Not a lot hangs on it, except some of the data, some of the statistics that you hear are going to obviously be a little bit obsolete. All right. Again, I'm speaking from Wisconsin today, and as of today, there's somewhere around this state, there's 8 people floating around with confirmed coronavirus, and yet there's no toilet paper at the grocery store. It's just absurd. And you know what? I kind of blame Tucker for that. I kind of do, because I think this alarmism is a problem. Okay, I think it's a problem. I don't think there is cause for it. Tucker thinks there is, but the disagreement between us has as its basis a little sort of quantitative issue, and that's really the point of this show and what I want to draw your attention to. So we'll get to that in a second. All right. Was that clear? Probably not, but we'll see. Here we go.
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson tonight. The Chinese coronavirus epidemic turns out to be just that, an epidemic. There's no denying that now. According to the official count, this country has recorded more than 500 cases of the virus and suffered at least 24 deaths. The real number is without question far higher than that. Soon we will have a better sense of just how much higher. By then...
Actually, it's worth stopping right here, because this is really the first instance in these series of clips that I'm going to play you where he makes this little move that I think, okay, it's fine if it's true, but given what you've said elsewhere, this is problematic. What did Tucker just say? He said, we have this data, in so many words, he said, we have this data on how much of the virus is out there. And then he made an additional claim. What was the additional claim? But that data is probably false, right? And what's the flip side of that? There's probably more, and what's implied is way more of the virus out there than we currently think there is. Okay. So we're underestimating is the point, right? That's what he just said. Should I back it up? That's pretty clear. I'll just back it up 10 seconds. You'll hear him say it again.
Sense of just how much higher. Then it turns out to be just that, an epidemic. There's no denying that now. According to the official count, this country has recorded more than 500 cases of the virus and suffered at least 24 deaths. The real number is without question far higher than that. Soon. Without question,
the real number is higher than that. Well, Nick, why are you hung up on this? Well, I'm hung up on it because at the beginning of the show, we rattled off these mortality rates. Now, what's a mortality rate? Well, I'm a layman. Again, I'm open to correction on this point. But as I understand a mortality rate, it's just a fraction. And it's a fraction where the numerator is the number of folks that have died from something, and the denominator is the total number of people that have the thing, right? So if 4 people die, and including those 4, 10 total people have had it, then the mortality rate is 4 out of 10. The mortality rate is 40%, which is really high, right? That's all a mortality rate is. So what did we say? We said China, 3.93%. In other words, 4 out of 100. Italy, 6.7%. In other words, 7 out of 100. Iran, 4.26%. In other words, 4 out of 100, right? Right? Okay, Nick, what's the problem? The problem is Tucker just said, surely more people have this than we currently estimate. All right, and this is what I ran by my family, specifically my daughter at the table the other night. It's like, look, you can't really say both of these things, can you? And this is important. I'm going to try to tie these 2 points together for you. This criticism is important because it forms the basis of the way that Tucker tries to distinguish himself from the right after distinguishing himself from the left. Now we come to this positioning posturing thing I was talking about earlier, okay? So because it's been the argument of the, well, it's been, what should we call it? I'll call it like the Trump-Pence doctrine. There's not like anything that is the Trump-Pence doctrine, but I mean, just with respect to the coronavirus, like the kind of position they've been taking is one sort of in practice, sort of like a calmness, a prudence, like, hey, everybody, this is serious, but let's keep it in perspective. He's like trying not to, throw people into chaos. There's that. But then one of the ways that they've sort of made that argument is like, look, we've had the flu around for a long time, and the flu is killing way more people than that. Right? So let's keep this in perspective. Now, Tucker's going to come along and say, that is irresponsible to say. Because whereas the mortality rate for the flu is minuscule, the mortality rate for coronavirus is way higher. So we do need to be alarmed about this. Here's the alarmism, right? It's Chicken Little, sky is falling. And that's what I think is worrisome and problematic and potentially irresponsible. Now you might say, but look, if the mortality rate is higher, then it's higher. And he's right to point that out. But yes, but he just said that there's certainly way more cases out there than we know. Do you see? Now, what does that mean? That means that the denominator is way bigger than we're currently supposing. What does that mean? That means that the fraction itself is much smaller than what we've supposed. That means that the mortality rate is much smaller, or likely smaller than we've supposed, right? Anytime you take a fraction and you increase the numerator either at a lesser rate than you're increasing the denominator, or you hold the numerator fixed and increase the denominator, which are effectively the same thing mathematically, right? Then the fraction's getting smaller, right? 4 out of 100 is a bigger number than 4 out of 1,000. You see? So Tucker's kind of trying to have it, as you'll see in a minute. I mean, I'm sort of jumping the gun here in the way I explain this, but I want you to understand the point of this as it comes to you as I play these clips. It seems to me like he's trying to have it both ways. It seems to me like he wants to say, no, what we're here calling the Trump-Pence doctrine. They're handling it wrong by saying, stay calm. We've dealt with the flu. We can deal with this. And the reason he's saying they're wrong about that is because this has a higher mortality rate than the flu. But then he turns around and says it's much more prevalent. Like the proliferation of it is much greater. Well, if that's the case, then the denominator of the fraction that represents the mortality rate is much greater too, in which case the mortality rate is smaller. Now the question becomes, how much smaller? We don't know. That's my claim. We don't know. And Tucker would have to acquiesce to that. Like later in the show, you're going to hear him speculate about how much smaller, but it's just speculation. But he's basing all this alarmism on speculation. And I think it's irresponsible. Okay, so I'm going to take a swig of beer and let Tucker talk for a second.
We will have a better sense of just how much higher. By then, this epidemic will have caused economic damage whose effects may dog us for years.
And do you see the point here? Is it the epidemic that's causing the economic damage, or is it this alarmism? Markets move on speculation. You guys are out there on the microphones, on the megaphones, screaming that the sky is falling and that the mortality rate's 4%, and all the toilet paper's gone off the shelves. Chill out, Mang.
People get sick. Some may die. This is real.
The sky
That's
is
the point
falling.
of this script, to tell you that we've forgiven if the whole thing snuck up on you as if from nowhere, an obscure virus arising from a meat market in eastern China to sicken American citizens in Oregon and New Hampshire and Illinois and Midtown Manhattan. It sounds ridiculous. Nor have our leaders helped us to take it seriously. On the left, you've heard them tell you.
Okay, now you see where this is going, right? He's headed right towards the equivocation we were talking about and the possible positioning and posturing that I've been identifying, right? He's going to say on the left, they do this, but X, Y, and Z. But on the right, they do this, A, B, and C, right? And both are wrong. And therefore, here I am, Tucker, in the middle, and this is the middle way, and this is the third way, and this is where the ground is holy. Stand here, take off your shoes, right? That's where this is going. I want to say before we get there that I hope, I get, it's funny because in a minute, Tucker, I don't know if I included this in the clips, but Tucker's going to sort of like, after sort of castigating the Trump-Pence doctrine or the Trump-Pence methodology or way of dealing with this, he's going to say, well, I get why people would be inclined to proceed this way because they think there's sort of a higher purpose at stake, and they're worried about the election, and they have good motivation. He's going to say, but they're still wrong. Okay, well, I sort of, conversely, I sort of get why Tucker's proceeding this way. Like, look, what's the cost to me being lowly podcaster sitting at an empty bar stool right now where three people are going to hear this show? Well, if I'm wrong, it's no big deal. If I come back and check the statistics in 6 months and half the world is dead, well, I'm going to feel pretty sheepish, and I'm just going to delete my podcast and go on about my business, right? The cost for me is pretty low. For Tucker to take my position, Tucker's in a position of media power and prominence, and to get a prediction wrong like that and have that much hanging on it, right, it's bad news, right? So I get why he wants to err on the side of caution. I do. I'm just questioning the reasoning. That's really all. I'm a layman. That's really all I can do. That's kind of what I do. I kind of just sit back, take it in, assimilate it, analyze it, and tell you what I think. And I just think this alarmism is unhelpful. And right now, just by the argument as it stands, I know that there's reason to be worried, but it just seems unfounded. It seems unfounded. I don't think you can have it both ways. I don't think you can say we need to be way more concerned about this because of the mortality rate, and then at the same time, then issue this proclamation about the data, which mathematically renders the mortality rate significantly less than we have previously supposed. I don't think you can have it both ways. I don't think you can have your, sorry, terrible joke. Have your coronavirus and eat it too. Okay, so now he's going to do this thing that I was talking about a moment ago. This sort of like equivocation that allows him to stake out this ground in the middle. What the philosophers call a third way, or splitting the horns of the dilemma, or something like that, right?
That the real worry is that you might use the wrong word to describe what's happening.
He's talking about the left and how they've made this like it's all about, oh, don't call it the Chinese virus, that's racial. Like the left is all hung up on completely inconsequential nonsense, what are essentially culturally Marxist considerations. Like I said at the beginning of the show, Tucker's great on criticizing the left. When he comes to criticize the right, I get the sense that he's doing it for reasons that are less meritorious. Okay? And I hate to say that. It's not like Tucker was a never Trumper. He wasn't one of those folks. He did reformat a little bit. He did go through a sort of like backstage wardrobe change after the Trump election. But even if you listen to him before the election, he wasn't a never Trumper. He wasn't one of these guys. It's not like he's now like coming out of the woodwork like David Frump. All right. It's not that. I just think he's erring on the side of caution at the expense of reason and prudence, which is it's kind of a difficult thing to weigh in the balance if you think about it. It's an understandable. If it's a mistake, it's an understandable mistake. Anyway, so this is the criticism of the left, and then you'll hear him transition into the criticism of the right, and you'll hear him do just what I've sort of complained about, in that the criticism of the right, not unlike the Ron Paul folks, it just gets kind of like hazy and ambiguous, and it's like, who said what? What? Who said that? Whose position is that?
To the country. It's racist, they're telling you, to blame the most racist nation in the world for the spread of this virus. Right. Meanwhile, if we're being honest, the other side has not been especially helpful either. People you trust, people you probably voted for, have spent weeks minimizing what is clearly a very serious problem.
Who, Tucker? Who? Who's been minimizing it? And what does it mean to minimize it? Are you talking about Trump? Is telling people to stay calm and that we'll get through it and that we faced other viruses, and right? Is that minimizing it, or is that good leadership?
It's just partisan politics, they say. Calm down.
Also, point to the person. This is, again, why I have such a problem with these ambiguous claims, right? This is the husband in me. Who went, what was said, how, and under what circumstances, and in what context, right? What? Who said it's just partisan politics? See, when he says this, what I fear is that he's taking an actually very reasonable and true claim, and he's caricaturing it. Surely folks on the right have said the left is using this issue in a partisan way. I essentially said at the beginning of the show. But that is an entirely different claim than saying that the issue itself and all the concerns surrounding it is merely partisan politics. I've never heard Trump say that. I've never heard Pence say that. I've never heard anyone in Trump's cabinet say that. It's not like I'm like, it's not like I'm like Skip Bayless sitting in front of the 35 TVs and in an armchair. I don't take it all in. I'm just saying, I haven't heard that. Have you? I don't think that's what they're saying. I just think they're pointing out something that's very obvious, that the left is desperate now, having failed with Russia, having failed with the Ukraine. The left is desperate now, with just a few months before the election, the left is desperate now to have something that they can lay at Trump's feet that makes him look incompetent. Because by all other indicators, he has won bigly. Huge, right? The economy, like everything, like every minority group, every subclass, the left loves to break us up into subclasses and subgroups of society with identity politics. Every group is doing better than it's ever done before. Trump, he's got a good track record. So they're just dying for something that they can lay hold of that will make him look incompetent. Then when you get down to the brass tacks of what exactly they're saying is incompetent about how he did it, you find out that really they're guilty of it and he's not, right? So, but never mind that. I'm just talking about their motivations. That much is clear. And that's true. But that's saying that and identifying that is different than saying this virus itself or the ordeal surrounding it is merely partisan politics. If that were true, Trump wouldn't have banned flights to and from China before the World Health Organization declared it a pandemic. If it was merely partisan politics, he wouldn't have taken decisive action. See? So I just think Tucker's being too fast and loose, and I worry about that. Because I like this guy. And I don't think he's being careful. And I worry about why. I know it's tempting, positioning, posturing it. I mean, look, God knows we've all done it, right? You take a position, later on down the line, you have reason to believe that some better position is available or recommends itself. So you try to like characterize yourself in a way that looks like you've always held this new position. It's like everybody does it, I just think he's staking out some territory for himself, and I just don't think it's helpful. Because what he's doing is participating in the very kind of alarmism that at least part of the criticism of the left consists in. And they're ringing the alarm not for concern for anybody, but because they want this guy out of the Oval Office. If they were concerned about coronavirus, they would have done something about it for the month and a half that they were trying to impeach Trump.
In the end, this is just like the flu, and people die from that every year. Coronavirus will pass, and when it does, we will feel foolish for worrying about it. That's their position. No doubt these people have good intentions.
Well, that's not exactly their position. It's somewhat like their position. But you should really, you should really say who you're talking about and what specifically they said. So we don't have to worry that we're just arguing with this imaginary figure. All right? And this is really suspect that he's doing it this way.
As they say this, many of them anyway.
Like, quote someone, please.
They may not know any better. Maybe they're just not paying attention. Or maybe they believe they're serving some higher cause by shading reality. Nobody wants to be manipulated by a corrupt media establishment.
Or maybe you think you're serving some higher cause by ringing the alarm. Or carving out the middle territory and criticizing the administration when really what they've done so far, they're to be praised.
And it is corrupt. And there's an election coming up. That's not to say anything that might help the other side. We get it.
No, again, this is the mischaracterization. I don't hear anybody on the conservative side who is saying the reason for downplaying coronavirus is because there's an election coming up. No. That's not the argument. The argument is the other side is ginning it up because there's an election coming up. Those are two totally different claims, okay? It's not like they're not dealing with it. It's not like it's not like there is not a Trump-Pence doctrine about this thing. There clearly is. They were like the first ones to act on it. If you just think about the very backdrop of Trump's presidency itself, everything that he rolled into office on, that everybody made fun of him for. Actually, Joel Pollack at Breitbart does a great job of pointing this out. All of his claims about China's dominance and our dependence on them and the porousness of the borders and the potential problems that those issues could potentially, he was right about all of it. Like, all of it is embodied in this coronavirus phenomenon. So clearly no one's like hand waving this event. They're just trying to point out to the left's motivations in running around and saying the sky is falling. That's not to say that there isn't a legitimate concern. It's just to try to be measured and prudent about it. And I think it would be really helpful if Tucker, instead of just arguing with an imaginary opponent here by saying but people on the right say this and this, he would say who he's talking about and what they've said. And I don't think he can do that because I don't think anybody has said the words he's putting into their mouth.
But they're wrong. The Chinese coronavirus is a major event. It will affect your life. And by the way, it's definitely not just the flu. In a typical...
Well, hold on. Now we're getting to the dinner table issue from the other night. See, now he's going to try to address. Here he's sort of acknowledging that they do have substantial, putatively rational reasons for thinking that it's not the thing that everybody's making out to be, right? And he's going to address that. What's he going to say?
The flu in this country has a mortality rate of about 1 in 1,000. The overall death rate for this virus, by contrast, is as high as 3.4%. That's 34 times deadlier.
Maybe, but then why 10 minutes ago did you say certainly it's way more prevalent than we've supposed? See the problem? To say certainly it's way more prevalent than we've supposed is to say it's out there with way much more proliferation. There's way more cases of it. In other words, the denominator of the fraction that represents the mortality rate is much bigger, which means the mortality rate is much smaller. Well, how much smaller? Because if on a long enough timeline, a smaller and smaller mortality rate with respect to the coronavirus, it just becomes like the flu, which is exactly what the administration is saying. So you can't have it both ways.
But even that number masks the true effects because the mortality is not distributed evenly. For those aged 70 to 79, the death rate is about 8%. For those over 80, it's nearly 15%. Death rates are also higher for those with diabetes, respiratory ailments, or heart conditions. That's a lot of people. So what will things look?
Well, I don't know that that's true because in the first place, it might be masked in different ways. It might be weighted in different ways, both positively and negatively. And in the second case, that might also be true for the flu. So I don't know that skews the aptness of the analogy, but whatever.
Like once the epidemic matures in America. Well, for answers, consider what's happening in Italy. Italy isn't authoritarian like China, and it's not.
Okay, now look what Tucker's just said. If we want to know, in so many words, if we want to know what sort of hell we're headed for, just look at Italy. Okay? If we want to know what's ahead of us. Now, what does this assume? Well, obviously it assumes a lot. See, what he's going to do now is he's going to treat Italy as if it's the perfect model for how this thing is going to play out in the U.S., which assumes what? It assumes all the conditions that are present in Italy are present in the U.S. That's a really broad, packed, loaded assumption, or thus set of assumptions. All right? And we'll get a little bit more into the nitty-gritty about what those assumptions consist in a second. I just want to draw your attention to it because he comes back to this again and again. And what did we say at the beginning of the show? The death rate, the mortality rate in Italy is like 6.7%. It's like 3 times what it is in the U.S. Now, the way Tucker's going to proceed is he's going to act like, well, we're at 2.3% now, but if we want to know where we're going to be in a month, just look at Italy. Now, a reasonable person goes, well, maybe, but what are the conditions in Italy that have provided for and facilitated that mortality rate? And are they present, or are there any countervailing conditions here in the U.S. that would prevent that? All right, you see?
Backward like Iran. It is a modern, developed Western country. In many ways, it's like our country.
Well, what does that mean? I don't know what that means. I mean, I have some sense of what he means by modern and developed, but that doesn't get at all at the level of nuance and detail that we're going to need to know if the analogy is apt, and therefore if the extrapolation is appropriate.
As of tonight, coronavirus has brought Italy to a standstill. The prime minister has suspended all travel throughout the country unless it's for work, health, or emergencies. All museums and archaeological sites are closed.
Let me just give some substance to what I'm trying to gesture at here. What was, and I'll tie this into something we said a moment ago about the whole Trump doctrine coming into the election, the whole Trump philosophy that everybody made fun of him for, the thing that both caused him to be the laughingstock of the political class and the hero of everyone else. What was it? What was one major component of it? Borders. Italy is part of the European Union, all right? Which means it's part of a borderless mass of countries where people just come and go to and fro as they please with very little oversight or checking. Or it's not the U.S. in that respect. Okay, the U.S. is separated both sort of geographically and sort of its like continental nature, right? It's kind of like surrounded by water, and it's only like borders two other countries, right? It's separated that way, but it's also separated in the sense that we don't have, while we do have a border problem, we don't have European Union borders, right? So certainly, or I'll make the claim even less. I'll make it even more conservative. It's very reasonable to suppose that the transference and proliferation of this virus is facilitated by a bunch of countries being adjacent to one another, where there is sort of no check or balance on who comes or goes where, when, or how. I know that I was going to say it's a different petri dish. I know a petri dish is sort of biological and bacterial. It's not whatever. You know what I mean? It's different. Now, is Tucker taking any of that into consideration? It doesn't seem so. I don't know that the analogy to Italy is apt. And I don't think simply saying, well, Italy's modern and not authoritarian, I don't know that that's enough to make the argument.
Public gatherings have been banned. Sporting events are now canceled entirely for the first time since the Second World War. In effect, the entire country is locked down tonight. Over the weekend, prisoners rioted, causing several deaths. Italy is now suffering almost 100 casualties, people who've died every day from the virus. Early evidence suggests it takes about 6 days for the number of coronavirus cases to double. If that trend holds here in the United States, it will be just a few weeks until we are where Italy is now. In a few months, if nothing stops the virus, there will be millions of cases here.
Okay, so do you see, there's the extrapolation. All the relevant conditions are equal, and Italy lies geographically less west of China than we do. So as this thing progresses westward across the globe, it hit Italy first. So if we want to know what's ahead for us, what's in store for us, just look at Italy. They're just a few weeks ahead of us on the timeline. All right? That is, in my mind, very simplistic reasoning. It assumes so much about the conditions there. It neglects so much about the conditions here and what's been done here versus what's been done there. I mean, like we said at the beginning of the show, Trump shut down travel to and from China 40 days before this thing was declared a pandemic. So to call him not prescient or not on the ball or not taking the thing seriously is absurd. Well, now the question becomes, well, what sort of effect did that have on the spread of the virus? It possibly had an effect. It possibly tamped it. Possibly. See, I'm just transacting in possibility here. You can't just assume that the causes for the situation in Italy are present here. Okay? It might just be, again, I'm just transacting in possibility. It might, notice the word might, it might just be that the low incidence of the disease that we're seeing here is, part. Okay, let's give Tucker. I'm trying to think of a way to compare it. Tucker wants to say that the low incidence that we're seeing here is simply a result of the fact that despite being on the same trajectory as Italy, we're not as far along in the timeline as they are. So what we can expect is to see what Italy has seen in a few days or a few weeks or a few months, right? Yeah, that's possible. You know what else is possible? It's possible that the low incidence that we're seeing here now is a result of steps that have been taken to forestall the deleterious effects of this virus by the administration, and that we're not going to hit that point. That's possible. Like, why are you not putting that forward? It just seems irresponsible to me. All right? It's like it assumes that the measures that the administration's taken could not possibly be having an ameliorating effect already. Okay? But we know that he has, and we know that they've done things. We have tangible proof of that. Because, Joe Biden called him a racist for doing it. Right? And now, if you notice, Joe Biden is borrowing ideas from Trump and putting it forward as his platform. Anyway. All right. So I'll let Tucker play Tucker. Bow tie. Well, he's not bow tie Tucker anymore. Like I said, he went through a wardrobe change back when Trump got elected. He's just now tie Tucker. We'll let Tucker talk, but you get the point.
This is bad more than simply for physical health. Average fell more than 2,000 points today. That's a decline of more than 7.5%.
Yeah, but again, markets move on speculation. They move on ideas passed to and fro amid the collective conscience, and you're contributing to those ideas. It's not necessarily the virus that is causing the markets to move. It's people like you screaming that the sky is falling.
It was the market's worst day since the 2008 financial crisis. It was the fourth worst day since the Great Depression. Grant Thornton, a major accounting firm, is predicting a global recession due to this epidemic and very low growth, if any, here in the United States. If a recession does hit, it will not be so simple to fight. The usual stimulus efforts, tax cuts and lower rates, won't reopen factories that have shut down to contain a virus. It won't get people to eat at closed restaurants or shop in closed malls or attend canceled sporting events. We're going to have a demand problem in this economy, and that's a big deal. In other words, our country is likely to experience a painful period we are powerless to stop. None of this is justification to panic. Okay. You shouldn't panic. In crisis, it's more important than ever to be calm. But staying calm is not the same as remaining complacent. It does not mean assuring people that everything will be fine.
No, it's not. It's not that they're being complacent. See, this is what I don't understand. It's like, what does he want the president to do? Like, rend his garments and like pour a bucket of blood over his head and scream at the moon? Like, I don't understand. It seems to me that he's being very presidential. He's saying, this is a serious thing. We're doing our best to handle it. We'll continue to. Don't freak out. We're going to get through this. That's not complacence. That's good leadership.
We don't know that. Instead, it's better to tell the truth. That is always the surest sign of strength. As they level with us, our leaders ought to prepare the public for what may come next. If a recession is coming...
Again, surely what Tucker has in mind when he says they should tell the truth is he has in mind that this claim that they're making when they compare it to the flu. And Tucker's only argument against that is that it cannot be like the flu because of the mortality rate. But we have already seen that Tucker doesn't have a quantitative leg to stand on in this argument, because he's just also said out of the other side of his mouth that surely the proliferation of this thing is greater than we've heretofore supposed. So the bottom line is we don't know that the mortality rate is as bad as everyone's supposing it is. And that it should be left at that. And you know what you do? Let me just finish the thought. You know what you do when you don't know? You act cautiously and prudently. And it seems to me that that's what the administration is doing. And it seems to me that all the alarmism it's right here in front of us.
We need to save money for the possible effect of that. If travel restrictions are coming, we should know that too. Already, the nonstop Acela train service between New York and Washington, which is critical to a lot of people, has been suspended. The Indian Wells tennis tournament in California, one of the largest in the world, has been canceled for this year. The March Madness basketball tournament is supposed to start in a couple of weeks, but it could be held in front of empty stands or postponed or canceled as well.
Been canceled.
In the end, you may be given the option to work from home, but eventually may be ordered to do that. You should know. We should also focus on preparing our healthcare system for the worst. the time of containing coronavirus with
now
widespread.
he's just off to the races with his program about like what? Okay, fine, but like in due time. You don't know where this thing is going yet. Surely all these things are on the table. They've been mentioned as on the. It's just like I don't understand what his beef is. I really don't. It's really bothering me because I like this guy, and I think that he's so often so right. And I just don't understand the vague and mischaracterized criticism against the administration. I know as soon as you say that, everybody says, but the test. Trump doesn't run the CDC. All right. And Tucker himself at the beginning of one of these segments, I forget whether I included it in this clip or not, says, it's just part of human nature. We can't plan for all the just infinite variety of cataclysms that might arise. We can only sort of deal with them as they arise. Okay, well, fine. Well, then I'll apply that to Trump and the CDC. He's not rolling into office being like, well, do we have enough tests in case a virus we've never seen? No, it's just like happened. Okay, let's deal with it now.
Testing and individual quarantines, blocking the borders. Useful, but that time is over. There are too many cases here now. We cannot stop this epidemic. We can only limit the damage that it does. Now is also the time to start looking ahead to the future. Think about what it would mean to face a deadlier version of coronavirus. It's not unimaginable. It's very easy to imagine. Are we ready for that? We're not ready now. We ought to be. One of the first things we can do to prepare ourselves is break our dependence on China for essential medical supplies.
Pretty sure that Trump has been saying something along those lines since he first announced his candidacy.
Last week, China's official news service published a piece gloating that the country has brought coronavirus under control. The story claims the rest of the world should apologize to China for criticizing the country over the virus, and then drops this not very subtle warning, quote, if China retaliates against the United States at this time, in addition to announcing a travel ban on the United States, it will also announce strategic control over medical products and ban exports to the United States. If China announces that its drugs are for domestic use and bans exports, the United States will fall into the hell of a new coronavirus epidemic, unquote.
Yeah, again, since day one, since day -10, Trump has been bemoaning our dependence on China and their unfairness and their control over our resources, et cetera, and our currency, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So now it's like, just give him some credit, man. Anyway, like I said earlier, I get why this is, you want to err on the side of caution. Why, if this thing goes south, I'd much rather be Tucker than me. I don't have that much at stake. I'm just sort of like pontificating from an empty bar stool or an empty bar here, right? I don't have a lot at stake. Tucker does, right? And it's responsible of him to try to sound every alarm that's worth sounding, but do it fairly, right? I don't know. I don't think he's been fair to the administration. From my limited perspective, from my layman's point of view, how they've been handling this has been pretty impressive. Yeah, there's shortages of stuff, right? But the experts who have cited those shortages don't lay it at Trump's feet, right? He's surely got to oversee the remediation of the problem, but the origination of the problem is not his. So we'll see. We'll see. I hope I'm right. I hope Tucker's wrong. I'm sure Tucker does too. He's a good guy. I hope, and you know what? It's not like Tucker's never been wrong before. It's not like he's never been wrong before.
Tucker Carlson tonight. As of right now, Joe Biden is the strong frontrunner for the Democratic presidential nomination. Almost nobody saw that coming. We certainly didn't, and we apologize for that. Again and again, we told you Joe Biden would never be the Democratic nominee. We were wrong.
Yes, you were. All right, that's it. I'll see you next time on the 40 on 7 Live podcast.